Wouldn't that be great if that was your story? Someone could say of you, this is one who praises the Lord. I know a lot about this person. I know a lot about you. But what I know in no uncertain terms, you are a worshiper of the Lord. Wouldn't that be the highest compliment you might be able to receive? Turn with me in your blue pew Bibles to Job chapter 40. It's on page 524 of your blue pew Bibles. We're finishing up this series, When Life Hurts, the story of Job. Job chapter 40, these are God's words for me and for you, and also for our brother Job. The Lord said to Job, shall a fault finder contend with the Almighty? He who argues with God, let him answer it. And Job answered the Lord and said, behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? I lay my hand on my mouth. I have spoken once, and I will not answer twice, but I will proceed no further. Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind and said, dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be in the right? And then I love this next section till verse 14. God's basically saying, hey, Job, you have been accusing me of governing the world poorly. You've questioned my justice. Then go ahead. Put on my royal robes. Take my scepter. Judge the world for yourself. There's a little bit of humor and not a little bit of sarcasm, if I dare say, of the Lord Yahweh right here. This is what he says. Have you an arm like God? And can you thunder with a voice like his? Then he says, well, dress yourself for it. Play the part. Adorn yourself with majesty and dignity. Clothe yourself with glory and splendor. You've been accusing me of not wiping out the wicked. Well, go right ahead, Job. Look at verse 11. Pour out the overflowings of your anger. Look on everyone who is proud and abase him. Look on everyone who is proud and bring him low. And tread down the wicked. There they stand. That's what you want to do, Job, right? With your puny little speeches. Can those speeches do all that? Hide them in all the dust together. Bind your faces in the world below. Job, once you can do all that, then I'll do this. Then will I also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can save you. You can't even save yourself, Job. You want to judge the world? You want to accuse me of injustice? So it's a bit of humor, a bit of sarcasm. Don't tell your teenagers. And then 15. Behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you, he eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength in his loins, and his power in the muscles of his belly. You're like, my husband's like this. No. He makes his tail swift like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs like bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. For the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plants he lies, in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. For his shade, the lotus trees cover him, and the willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident, though Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can one take him by his eyes, or pierce his nose with a snare? Can you draw out Leviathan with a fissure, or press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose, or pierce his jaw with a hook? Will he make many pleas to you? We speak to you soft words. Oh, Job, you've got me. You've got me. Please let me go. We say that to you, Job. We make a covenant with you to take him for your servant forever. Job, you're so strong. Let me sign the covenant. And let me cry uncle to you, Job. Will you play with him as with a bird? Will you put him on a leash for your girls? In other words, will the Leviathan be a little lapdog for you, Job? Will traders bargain over him? Will they divide him up among the merchants? Can you fill his skin with harpoons or his head with fishing spears? Lay your hands on him and remember the battle. You will not do it again. Behold, the hope of man is false. He is laid low even at the sight of him. No one is so fierce that he dares to stir him up. Who then is he who can stand before me? Who was first given to me that I should repay him? Whatever is under the whole heaven is mine. I will not keep silence concerning his limbs, or his mighty strength, or his goodly frame. Who can strip off his outer garments? Who would come near him with a bridle? Who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth is terror. His back is made of rows of shields, shut up so closely as with a seal. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. They are joined to one another. They clasp each other and cannot be separated. His sneezings flash forth light. Yes, even his sneezings. His eyes are like eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke, as from a boiling pot, and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. Now that's some big halitosis, right? In his neck abides strength, and his terror dances before him. The folds of his flesh stick together, firmly cast on him, and immovable. His heart is hard as a stone, hard as a lower millstone. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. The Vulgate says the angels are afraid. At the crashing they are beside themselves. Though the sword reaches him, it does not avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He counts iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. The arrow cannot make him flee. For him, sling stones are turned to stubble. Clubs are counted as stubble. He laughs at the rattle of javelins. His underparts are like sharp potsherds. He spreads himself like a threshing sledge on the mire. He makes the deep boil like a pot. He makes the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him, he leaves a shining wake. One would think the deep to be white-haired. On earth, there is not his like, a creature without fear. He sees everything that is high. He is king over all the sons of pride. This is the word of the Lord. Now I know what you're thinking. Preacher, what are you going to do with this? I honestly had the same thought this week, more than once. I told my wife a few weeks ago, we're walking the ocean after a Sunday afternoon service, and I tell her, she's like, why do you always have to process the sermon with me? I was like, honey, because I don't get a lot of feedback, and I have a lot of things I didn't even include in the sermon, and there's just a lot of, this is like, it's like giving birth on a Sunday and then walking away from your baby on a Monday. And she didn't like that analogy. She's like, I don't think so, buddy. You haven't given birth. You can't say that. So I was like, no, well then it's like getting married on Monday. You have your first fight on Wednesday. And then by like Friday or Saturday, you're like, I don't think we're going to make it. I don't think we're going to make it at all. And then your Sunday is like, well, I'm here. I might as well preach the text. And then you walk away from your spouse on Monday. She's like, well, that's maybe a little bit. So anyway, suffice to say, Wednesday and Friday and Saturday, lots of struggles with my text that I married on Monday. Let me start here by saying this. The riddles of God are more satisfying than the solutions of man. The riddles of God are more satisfying than the solutions of man. Give me any day of the week God's response, God's word, God's encounter with Job, enigmatic though it may appear, over human wisdom and human solutions to the problem of pain, suffering, and evil. The riddles of God are always more satisfying than the solutions of man. One of the more popular solutions of man in the 20th century came from the pen of Rabbi Harold Kushner's wildly successful book. I'm sure you've heard of it, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. It was a New York Times bestseller. And so after watching his son die from a rare disease, Rabbi Kushner concludes with these words. It is too difficult even for God to keep cruelty and chaos from claiming their innocent victims. So what was the solution of man? What was the solution of Rabbi Harold Kushner? Diminish the power of God. Diminish the sovereignty of God. Now, when I ask you a stupid question, and you're like, you specialize in these. I'm like, well, it's my spiritual gift. Did you hear any of that in God's response to Job? Do you see him touting his limited power in any way, shape, or form? But everywhere, no, highlighting his strength, his majesty, and his power. So Job learns something satisfying, I would argue, from the riddles of God. What does Job learn? First, Job learns, he responds to the creatures, these wild creatures that we talked about last week that are paraded before him. And so Job has an answer to all that. Chapter 40, verse 4, look what Job says. Behold, I am of small account. What shall I answer you? First, Job learns smallness. He learns something satisfying from all these riddles of God. Job says, is he of small account? The NIV translates it as unworthy. Perhaps a better yet translation comes from the New English Bible, which says, I carry no weight. The Hebrew word kalal, used there, literally means to be light. To be light. And it's the exact opposite of another very important Hebrew word, kavod, which means weightiness, which means to be heavy. And in the Old Testament, all around the Old Testament, describes the glory of God with this word, kavod. There's a weightiness, there's a heaviness to the very character and glory of God. And so when Job meets God, when Job meets God in the whirlwind, Job doesn't even look God eye to eye, but God has to clothe himself in a storm, a theophany. Even when he meets God like that, what does he say? I am kalal. I am a lightweight compared to the weightiness of God. I often say that we take ourselves too seriously and God not serious enough. In other words, we're often serious about the wrong things in life, are we not? And if I am one to start leading my life taking Jason Carter way seriously, I'm going to take Jason Carter way more serious than I take God himself. You might want to say to me, buddy, something's wrong with you. Your life has gone completely off track. You're taking the wrong things seriously in life, especially when you take yourself more seriously than you take the living God. And don't you see this today in our culture all the time? Our culture delights to take with complete seriousness things that are completely the wrong things. But when Job meets God, when Job encounters God, there is none of that. Rather, there's this sentiment, I am light. I am small. I carry no weight compared to the weightiness of the glory of God. You think Job learns something from these riddles of God that are satisfying? You bet. He learns that he is of small account in the great scheme of life. The second thing Job does is that he puts his hand over his mouth. Not only does this prove effective in marriage, it also proves very effective in your relationship with the Lord. I've spoken once and I will not answer twice, but I proceed no further. You see, in the Scripture, there is a lot of bodily movement. People embody their worship, and they do this by a number of ways. Sometimes they kneel before the Lord. Sometimes they bow down before the Lord. Sometimes they lay flat on the ground, prostrate as though dead before the weightiness and the glory of God. Sometimes they lift their hands in praise. But I wonder whether one of the best bodily expressions of worship is to do just what Job did here. Hand over mouth. Silence before God. I love what one writer says. One can fall on one's face and continue to blubber and babble. But to yield the tongue is to yield everything. This was the same sentiment of the psalmist in Psalm 46:10. Be still and know that I am God. This is the same sentiment of the prophet Habakkuk in chapter 2, verse 2. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him. One of the ways that we can worship and submit ourselves to the Lord is to say to the Lord, okay, Lord, I am all ears, no mouth. All ears before you, no mouth. When was the last time that you practiced silence before God as an act of worship? This is also a sign of wisdom from Job's encounter with God. But then Yahweh's speeches takes a rather interesting turn, does it not? I know some of you are just like, all right, just get to the Behemoth, get to Leviathan. What do you got there? The Behemoth and Leviathan, two ominous, foreboding beasts. And so I want to give you the best homiletical question that you could ask as a preacher. What is going on here? What about these guys, right? Often there are linked to two creatures in the natural world. The Behemoth with the hippopotamus and the Leviathan with the crocodile. Now that would be a straightforward, naturalistic explanation of these guys. And one that, it might not surprise you, is very, very prominent in our modern times. The problem, however, the first problem, is that this naturalistic explanation is that neither creature is wholly identifiable with a specific animal. For instance, you might have noticed how the Leviathan is pictured almost as a fire-breathing dragon. Look at chapter 41, verse 19 through 21. Chapter 41, verse 19. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke as from a boiling pot and burning rushes. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. The text doesn't have those sound effects. I put those in there. I don't know if you know this about a crocodile. They don't breathe fire. I've watched Discovery Channel. I have yet to see a fire-breathing crocodile. If you have seen this, please forward me the clip. I would love to see it. That's the first problem. The second problem is that this crocodile is really not an ocean-dwelling creature like the Leviathan seems to be. Well, look at the behemoth. The behemoth is an odd plural form of animal or cattle, which is best probably translated super beast. A super beast. So now get the picture. You have a super beast on land, and you have a super beast of the sea, imposing, ominous, formidable foes to mankind. The second reason that a naturalistic explanation doesn't really... I was going to say cut the cheese. Can we cut that out of the video? Can we just say it like that? The second reason I don't go for the natural explanation is also that's rather anticlimactic. All these wild creatures are paraded before Job. And then Job puts his hand over his mouth. Silence. And then God says, oh, by the way, I forgot to tell you about the crocodile and the hippopotamus. And after that, Job confesses his sin. Now, that's a rather dull climax for such a weighty book. Especially a book that began with this weighty conversation between God and the accuser, Satan. And so at other times and ages of the church, not only in the modern era, the behemoth and the Leviathan were thought to be the embodiment of cosmic evil itself. That power unceasingly opposed to God and his purposes. Gregory the Great, Thomas Aquinas, John Calvin, John Johnson Edwards. These are not lightweights like Steve and I, right? I included myself, Steve. Come on. These are big weights. All of them believe that behind this great picture of the mysterious Leviathan resides an even greater enigma in the book of Job, namely that of Satan. So it's my belief that while the behemoth is stylized after the hippo, and while the Leviathan is patterned after the crocodile, that these are creatures with heightened cosmic implications that get at the very nature and origin of evil itself, that of Satan himself. And so what was Job's problem all along during the dialogues? Job's problem all along that he was never invited to the boardroom. He never heard this very important conversation between God and Satan that so affected his life and so affected him with trials and sufferings. So what does Job do? Job begins slowly accusing God of being his enemy. And so now, what is Yahweh doing? God is now revealing to Job the nature of his true adversary. Job had complained that God was his true enemy. This is what he says in chapter 16, verse 9. Job says, he, not referring to Satan, but God, he, God, has torn me in his wrath and hated me. He has gnashed his teeth at me. My adversary sharpens his eyes against me. And so now, not surprisingly, look at how God describes the Leviathan. Look at chapter 41, verse 14. He says, who can open the doors of his face? Around his teeth is terror. Then jump down to verse 16. One is so near to another that no air can come between them. God is saying, Job, I have never been your adversary. Job, there are cosmic evil forces in our world. Job had also complained that God's strength was being marshaled against him. This is what Job says in chapter 9, verses 17 and 19. He says, "For he crushes me with a tempest and multiplies my wound without cause. If it's a contest of strength, behold, he is mighty." Job had complained that God is marshaling his superior strength against one little hapless individual, an all-out assault against Job. And so God points out the behemoth, this super beast. And the whole point of the behemoth is to say something like this: look at how strong the behemoth is. Behold, his strength is in his loins, his power in the muscles of his belly, his limbs like bars of iron. Did you not know, Job, that in my creation there are cosmic forces of brutish strength that you could never come against in a million years by yourself? And so Yahweh is revealing to Job the true nature of his adversary. I have not been, nor ever will be, your enemy, my child, my suffering child, Job. The Leviathan is a fierce, vicious, meat-eating savage with fire coming out of his deadly teeth. And so what is Yahweh saying? He's saying to Job, you should tremble at the behemoth. Job, you should tremble at the Leviathan. Now, in a world of movies and visual images, this is very hard to convey to you this morning, that this poetry is filled with images of terror and images of fear for our brother Job. And I began to think, what could I do to illustrate this? And my mind went back to Equatorial Guinea. Now, in Equatorial Guinea, about 99% of the indigenous population has an inordinate fear and profound terror of dogs. I mean, rising to the level of a national psychosis. You think I'm kidding? Ask my wife, right? Us expats from all over the world, we would often talk about this. I can't believe the terror and the fear that strike the heart of these folks from dogs. In fact, after our house got, some robber tried to break in, we got a couple dogs, little mutts. They're 3 weeks old. Now, these aren't going to help against burglars in a year, maybe a year and a half. And so our landlord, she comes over and she notices the dogs, and she visibly starts shaking and quaking with fear. Are the dogs tied up? Are the dogs tied up? And I'm like, these little things, these mutts are not going to hurt anybody. I'll put them inside. And this was not uncommon. Why? Because there was no dogs native to this part of Central Africa. And second, the only dogs that the indigenous population encountered during the colonial days were tied up, vicious, guard, and attack dogs. And so people were terrified out of their minds from little dogs. But this is exactly how Yahweh is describing the great Leviathan to Job. Or you might think of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the Black Riders. If you saw the movie, the 9 Horsemen of Middle-earth. These horses are scary, are they not? They're the epitome of evil and chaos. I know you peed your pants, even as an adult watching it, right? This is what you get in the third service. Sorry about this. It's been a long day. They want to hunt Bilbo Baggins down, and that's all they want to do. This is a great visual portrait of evil. This is the Leviathan that God paints for Job. And so the question is this: what's the motive of Yahweh? What motive do you think Yahweh has of telling Job, consider the behemoth and the Leviathan? These creatures are stronger than you. These creatures fill you with terror. These creatures fill you with fear. Why is Yahweh taking time to extol the strength of the Leviathan, making him appear so awesome and so invincible? What possible motive does Yahweh have for doing that? Here's the payoff. Job, if you tremble before the Leviathan and the Behemoth, if you tremble before these creatures, how much more before Yahweh? Job, if suffering and evil have you on your knees, how much more should you be on your knees before the God of the universe? And that's precisely exactly what Yahweh says in chapter 41, verse 10 and 11. He says, no one is so fierce that he dares stir him up, the Leviathan. You dare not even poke him. Then he says, who then is he who can stand before me? You don't even stir the Leviathan. You don't even stand before me. Who has first given to me that I should repay him? Whatever's under the whole heaven is mine. If you tremble at the colossal power and might of the Leviathan Behemoth, but you don't tremble before the Lord God Almighty, Job, something ain't right with you. And so can I ask you just a very honest question this morning that I think is worth pondering for our life of discipleship and for our life of worship? And it's this. It's very simple. When was the last time you trembled before the Lord? When was the last time you trembled before the Lord? If I'm honest, this week I asked myself the very same question in my study. And tears began to roll down my face because I couldn't honestly remember the last time I trembled before God. And I began to ask God, is it because I don't understand the weightiness and the majesty of who you are and your presence in my life? Do I need a reminder? Do you need a reminder of the greatness of God? This is the God who puts a fish hook in the great Leviathan. I did think back to one of the seasons of life that I did tremble before the Lord. It was 5 or 6 years ago. My best friend in Central Africa, Modesto, and his wife, Trinity, had lost a toddler about 18 months old. Then a month later, Modesto and I are actually presiding as pastors over another friend of ours, Luis, whose wife had just lost a one-day baby. Can you imagine? You just lost an 18-month-old. Now you're presiding over a funeral of a one-day-old baby. About a few months after that, a few weeks after that, Lisa's best friend, Elena, her 12-month-old grandson, tips over a huge vat of cooking oil and dies 5 days later in the hospital from burn wounds. And I remember trembling before the inscrutable purposes of God. And so I ask you, just like I asked myself, to what degree is trembling completely necessary? Maybe even a prerequisite in order to trust. So I found myself during that season trembling the very inscrutable purposes of God. Why, God? It doesn't seem fair, God. I laid all the questions down. And I found myself surrounded and in the presence of these suffering saints who still worship with all their might, still trusted in God's inscrutable ways. And I found myself trembling before God as a sign of faith. See, if I don't tremble, I become bitter. If I don't tremble, I become proud. If I don't tremble before God, I might never learn to trust. Can you trust the Lord without trembling before Him? Part of the problem of the church these days is that we're trying to pass on the faith to the next generation. We're asking them to trust, to have faith in God, but we've never shown them how and why they should tremble before the Lord. So I wonder if God would say something to me like this: Jason, you can trust in an idea of me, but if that trust doesn't include trembling, you're only trusting an imaginary God of your own imagination. Friends, we need trembling in our lives to battle sin. We need trembling in our lives to actually go out and live the Great Commission, to be witnesses for God. We need trembling in our lives to do what Job did. Lord, once I'll speak, but not a second time, not before this great and majestic and awesome God. Don't you remember what Paul said at the end of Romans chapter 11? He burst forth into praise. Oh, the depth of the riches and the knowledge and the wisdom of God. How unsearchable are His judgments. How inscrutable His ways. If you and I bet, were left to design our own spiritual formation, I bet that we would never design it to include trembling. We would say, Lord, I'll get some competencies. I'll go to church. Maybe I'll even include in some lifeless Bible reading. But we wouldn't include trembling as part of our spiritual formation. When was the last time I trembled before the Lord? It's part of my worship and it's part of my discipleship. In the book of Job, trembling came before trust. In the book of Job, trembling came before a deeper level of surrender. In the book of Job, trembling came before confession. So I don't often do this, but let me give you some homework this week, and it's very simple. Can you just once this week pause to tremble before the Lord for who He is, what He has done? I bet that would be not only good for Job, but also be good for you and for me. Let's go to God in prayer.